We pick back up here. One of the things that I really want to talk to us about, bless you, I love the fellowship. I run my mouth too long too. It's my problem. Sorry, I'm guilty. Is safety. You cannot expect people to be vulnerable if they don't feel safe. Now this word like resilience needs some clarity. Because when some of us hear safe, we hear, okay, you just mean being soft. You're not going to call anybody out. That's what it means. Somebody can come and tell you that they've basically just sinned to the moon, and you're not going to say anything. You're just going to sit there and listen. And you're going to do that week after week after week, and that's what it means to create safety. That's not what it means to create safety. First of all, safety is about being able to ask questions. Okay. If you find yourself in a community where people can't ask questions, people are going to struggle to mature. People struggle to mature in communities wherein people can't ask questions. Safety is first and foremost about being able to ask questions. The other thing about safety is being in a community of people who don't just allow you to make a mess, but allow you to be a mess at times. And not just be a mess, but be a process. That safety is when you find yourself in a community of people who take the long view on you. I have a crazy story. I think of some of us in this room, we have amazing stories, but they're kind of crazy. There's a lot of misery that we bring to ministry. And it's important to take the long view. We in our church, we've had incredible growth, but we've had incredible challenges. And through the years, we baptize people. It's interesting, sometimes I realize after baptizing someone that they trigger me. Because part of it is when someone gets baptized and I feel like they remind me of myself, I want to save them from all the mistakes that I made. And now I'll start getting impatient, I get frustrated, because I want to save them. I don't want you to do what I did. But what I'm realizing, I'm thinking of one brother in particular. I remember there were two brothers. One of them is here, actually. And there was a brother who's like, man, Kyle, I know you're frustrated discipling this guy, but he's like, you got to understand the vision for this guy's life. Here's what blocked my vision. He reminded me so much of myself. It triggered the mess out of me. Sometimes when we disciple, sometimes when we lead, we're just triggered and we don't even know it. And we start reacting, but the truth is that we are reenacting something. People focus so much on reacting when the reality is there is something that's being reenacted that we haven't been curious enough about how to lean into. Something's getting kicked up. And it's hard to take the long view on people that trigger us. And I'm realizing about messy people or, being a mess and process and all of that. Oftentimes, it's not so much that I'm just so indignant about, holiness and sin and all that. This person just irritates me. That's what it really comes down to. It's more about that. Safety is about being in a community of people who take the long view on you. One of my concerns, though, is that we're kind of starting to realize, okay, we got to take the long view. We didn't baptize the world in a single generation. All right? You're not really thinking about longevity, right? When you're going to baptize the world in one generation. And so one of the things that we have to do is we're learning we got to take the long view on members. Here's my concern. That it's not just members that we have to take the long view on, it's also ministers that we have to take the long view on. That's a concern that I have. Ultimately, how do we go from, and I didn't start the timer either. I'm gonna end early, don't worry about it. I went to a training earlier this year, and it was an incredible training for therapists, really working through deep trauma. Like, as you go through and you get better, you got to get more advanced training and stuff. And this is a world-renowned trainer, and he talked about, for his counselors, he said, hey, you need to be a hope merchant for your people. You need to be a hope merchant. And it's interesting, you look at Joseph, and it's like, is Joseph one of those guys? Oh, yeah. He is a hope merchant. In Genesis 40, verse 7, remember how Joseph displays emotional intelligence? He also instills hope amidst his own unfavorable situation. Joseph is a hope merchant. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes, I'm telling you, being a therapist, man, there's a lifetime max on this thing. Dealing with trauma, I was talking to Sean St. John. He's one of my great friends now. I was introduced to him through Jennifer. And he told me, I was like, man, because I called him a couple months ago, and I was just like, dude, this is beating me up. Everywhere I go, I deal with trauma as a marriage and family therapist in private practice, and as a minister and someone who teaches. I just can't get, and he's like, yeah, Kyle, you gotta understand, man, this has a lifetime max. And it's easy sometimes to show up for work, but not show up to hope. See, here's a tough thing about being a minister, is that when you show up to work, you can't leave hope at home. You have to be a hope merchant, and you can tell when someone is struggling to be a hope merchant because they start demanding faith rather than build it. I notice that for me when I'm in a discipling relationship is I start demanding things because I really don't have the hope to really help people build it. Struggling to be a hope merchant. I really want to lift up Daniel and Veronica Reyna. They are in the Omaha Church of Christ. They do the campus ministry and the young pros, and they have been phenomenal. People don't even realize what they've been through. They have no clue. We got all kinds of growth in our church right now. We're finally over 100. Man, we were, the ticker symbol was down for a while. And finally we're up, right? And it's just, it's a signature moment in churches. And let me tell you something about Daniel. I remember his first sermon. And really since then, him and Veronica, they have been hope. They are incredible examples of being a hope merchant. I don't know that I've ever seen them demand faith because they're so focused on building it in people. And now we got all these young kids who are faithful and they're responding to the message because they've done a great job being conduits of being hope merchant. The second thing is that we have to be careful. Now I'm missing a slide. It's okay though. We have to be careful not to get too attached to the various seasons of our lives. This slide should say seasons, stuck in seasons. Can you imagine if Joseph, when it was his time to be prime minister, kind of shut down and just said, I know how that works. I got the t-shirt and the fanny pack. I know how promotion works. Been there, done that, I know how that goes. You get up and then all of a sudden you get slammed down to the ground. I'll just stay as a prison warden. We have to be careful not to get too attached to the various seasons of our lives. One of the most challenging things about going through hard times and so forth is that we don't actually know what we're being prepared for when we're going through it. I think some of us, Joel, you've been in the ministry for a long time, Steve, Todd, on and on. Some of you guys have been doing this for so long. And I want you to think for a moment, those of us who've been around a long time, that maybe it took 10 or 15, maybe 20 years for you to finally learn what you were actually being prepared for when you went through that challenge 20 years ago. Oh, now I get it. It takes time to figure out what we're actually being trained for. And Joseph is, he's someone who, to some degree, he's being trained for prime minister. And his training starts the day he sets forth on Potiphar's estate as a slave. That's when his training for prime minister began. We don't really know what we're being trained for, do we? Go through this pandemic, racial tension, politics. What are we being trained? It feels like a London pea soup fog. It's disorienting, and many of us find ourselves de-skilled. We really don't know what to do. You're being trained. The second thing, thirdly, is we have to be careful not to give God a deadline of how much longer we're going to be faithful. Can you imagine if Joseph at year 12 said, you know what, I'll show up to work, but I'm not going to show up to hope? This dude is 6 months, 12 months, not just from liberation, but promotion, and doesn't even know it. We have to be careful not to give God a deadline of how much longer we're going to be faithful. Everybody else is discouraged around here. Everybody else is exhausted, but yet Joseph is encouraged. You know what I believe with Joseph? He stayed faithful to the vision that he was given when he was young. Now, here's the key with that. He wasn't very mature when he was given the vision. Some of us, all right, I'll find my vision again. I'll find my vision again. It's what happened when I was young. Yeah, I think sometimes we realize, man, when I got the vision, I was pretty immature. And then we get this dilemma. I want to talk to us about a dilemma that many of us, I think, find ourselves in, or at least some of us, wherein you don't want to give God a deadline of how much longer you're going to be faithful. And you're trying to figure out if God is calling you to a particular season, that God has you in this post, He has you in this assignment. And is God telling me to just stick it out? Is God telling me to double down on what He's called me to? Is that my ministry assignment? Or is there another season that God is calling me into? There's a dilemma that we find ourselves in. Am I supposed to stand firm? Is this my post? Or is God trying to tell me that my leaves are changing? And it's time for transition. That's challenging. And I just want to say this, there are no easy answers. There's no pat answers. Do I stick it out or is it time to go? We want to be careful that we don't give God a deadline of how much longer we're going to be faithful. And we also want to make sure that we don't get too attached to the particular seasons of our lives. I recently saw this movie, Dune. I don't know how many of you guys saw this movie. All right, I got some sci-fi nerds in here. This is good. I knew I felt at home. We're safe. We're safe. And he's talking to his son about the call. I don't think we talk about the call enough. How to burn. Talk about trauma. They don't call it a calling for the call is serious. I mean, the last 4 years of my life, I'm like, man, what is God doing? I'm a marriage and family therapist, been doing that for a while, been in private practice about 4.5, 5 years ago now. I go back to theology school, started at Rocky Mountain, I'm at Harding now. And my ultimate goal is to do doctoral research on biblical humanity, right? That's the ultimate. What does it mean to be human? I think many of our issues come down to that. We don't really know what it means to be human. And I'm like, man, when I'm going through, I'm like, what is this about? I don't get it. I've got this master's in marriage and family therapy. I'm doing private practice. I'm working with trauma. And now I'm doing theology because I just love God's word. I love the languages. If I could spend my time, I would just spend my time with Hebrew and Greek. That's what I love to do. But the need of the hour is trauma. But I'm like, what is God? What's this for? And the call is something over the last however many years, it burns. You can go to sleep, but does that mean you rest? That call, man, we need to be real about the call and how it affects us. But he's talking to his son. Okay, get back to Dune here. He's talking to his son, and he says, a great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it. Now, here's what's interesting. He says to his son, and if the answer is no, well, what do you mean no? The answer is no. Here's what he tells his son. Then you'll still be the only thing I've ever needed you to be, and that is my son. You'll still be that. I think some of us, being in the ministry it'll freak you out. Because it's like, man, if I go back there to that book rack and I open up one of Jennifer Conzen's book and I realize, oh my goodness, I've mistaken intensity for intimacy, which is easy to do. It's now all of a sudden something, how's that gonna affect my ministry assignment? I go and I look at one of Tim's books and he's talking about grief and it unhinges something in me. What's gonna happen to my ministry assignment? There's a lot of pressure. I think about the learning curve that many of us have been on. The learning curve in the last 24 months has been vertical. Climb. If I go back there and I talk to Joel about taking a sabbatical, and God reveals to me that I need one, what happens to my ministry assignment? I remember before I did what was called the millennial sabbatical, where you take a month off, but you still work, and you kind of you do the best you can. The life stage I'm in, man, I can't do 3 months and all that, but I did what I could. I did it in July. And I did like this Sabbath series on my YouTube channel. And afterwards, Joel was like, hey, can I give you some coaching about your sabbatical coming up? I was like, yeah. He's like, you need to unplug, dude. You need to get off the grid. And I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I got some coaching. What's gonna happen to my ministry assignment if I decide to turn towards the things that maybe I've been avoiding? You know, here's the thing, what we run from runs us. Let me give you a little John Gottman for a minute. Jennifer would really appreciate this. John Gottman is this researcher, he studies marriages. And here's what he determines. It's not just something that applies to marriage, this applies to other things as well. That there are 3 primary bids. Like when someone bids for connection, there's 3 primary ways that you can respond to that. One is to turn against, the other is to turn away, and then the other is to turn towards. It's easy when there's pain to either turn against it or to turn away from it. The challenge is to turn towards it. And I want you to think for a moment, for some of us, we're worried about the next level that God is calling us to emotionally. Maybe there's some stuff that has been unearthed. Even as you're listening right now, something's getting kicked up. You can feel it. It's close to the surface. I remember yesterday I was in the airport, and I saw my wife and my son drive away. My wife is pregnant with our second. We're going to give birth at the end of this month. Super excited about it. Her name is going to be Amaya. Our son's name is Shay. So they're driving away, and I'm about to lose it. I'm like glad I have my mask on. I go up to the counter, and I'm on the edge. I'm on the edge. And I'm like, well, why am I working so hard to hold it in? Either I'm turning against or I'm turning away, but I don't really want to turn towards it right now. And then I just let it, a little eye sweat come down. And it was okay. We have to be reminded, I'll end with this, that the basis for relationship is not my ministry assignment. The basis for relationship is relationship. What's going to happen in my ministry assignment? I don't know, but here's what I know. You'll still be the only thing he's ever wanted you to be, and that is his child. I love you guys, and to God be the glory. Amen.